Or just stoned people looking at a bear print in the sand being like, oh, fuck.
This is We Bleed Orange and Black, the podcast for Halloween and horror lovers. Join us as we interview creators, discuss our favorite horrors, and share original spooky stories. I'm Jeff C. Carter, and this week we're talking with Carson Winter about his new book, Soft Targets. Carson Winter's fiction has been featured in Apex, Vastarian, Tales to Terrify, and the No Sleep podcast. He is the co-editor of Cosmic Horror Monthly and a co-host of Dead Languages, a podcast about the craft of horror fiction with fellow author P.L. McMillan. Carson lives in the Pacific Northwest, and some have dubbed him the rising king of weird horror. Welcome to the show, Carson.
Thank you so much for having me, Jeff. I'm so stoked to be here.
My liege, it's an honor.
And that whole rising king of weird horror thing, that thing cracks me up every fucking time, I swear. I think one of my friends, Caleb Stevens, pulled that out, but he just kept using it. And
yeah,
he pushes it at every turn. But I part of me loves it, but a part of me feels like it's a lot to live up to, for sure.
Yes, well, heavy lies the crown, I'm sure.
Yes.
I'm going to hit you with an icebreaker.
All right.
If you could be a centaur with half of any animal, what would it be?
Now, just to be clear, centaur, that's half human, half horse, right? Traditionally.
Yes. Traditionally, although I'm using centaur in the terms of hybrid or chimera here.
So my first thought immediately was like, do I even want to go from the traditional? Because assuming you're a traditional centaur, you are equipped with a massive horse stick, which is kind of cool.
Or horse vagina.
I'm speaking for myself. I'd probably have the horse stick. But yes, you could have a lovely horse vagina also. Oh man, that is actually really tough though. Like, I'm trying to think of all the animals I think are sick. And I'm trying to think like what I could actually benefit from in my everyday life, which means I'm taking this too seriously.
No, this is the type of import I wish to bring to bear. Who wouldn't benefit from two giant snapping lobster claws?
That's true. Here's a weird one. So I really like bears. And I think I'd actually go half bear, but for a weird reason. And it's because I read that bears cannot get diabetes because of like whatever hormones or chemistry that's going on in their body. So I'm wondering, maybe if I am a half bear man centaur thing, I can avoid like some genetic predisposition to diabetes. And also, I could sleep most of the year.
Or you might develop some heretofore unknown variety of diabetes, type 3 diabetes, which only afflicts half bear, half human hybrids.
It's a real gamble, right? I'm still willing to give it a shot, though. You know, even if I can't devour 10,000 calories a day, I think it's worth trying. It's a noble thing to aspire to.
Surely, it is a noble aspiration. But I have to ask, would you be the bottom half bear, the top half bear, front half bear, back half bear, bear in the middle?
Oh, man. I didn't even consider the bear in the middle thing. I think I'm going to go... Oh, this is going to be weird. I think I'm going to go top half bear. I'm going to go top half bear. Yeah. I don't know why. It's just my heart is telling me.
Would human legs be able to support the top half bear?
Because, you know, I'm picturing like a grizzly, and those fuckers have like big old heads, and I'm imagining my little legs trying to carry a giant bear half body. Like I'm 600 pounds from the waist up.
At least you could walk on all fours.
That is true. But I'm also thinking, like, is my brain replaced, too? So do I just have a bear brain now? Do I lose all human intelligence?
Not only that, but your intake for your body would be bear-sized.
Okay.
Your output would be human-sized, if you catch my drift. So you're eating 10,000 calories of berries and raw fish a day.
least that would be a hilarious life.
It would be a short, hilarious life taken too soon by type 3 diabetes. So now that we have that established, tell us a bit more about yourself, Carson. What got you into horror?
Oh man, I have been deep into horror since I was a very little child. I don't know if you remember these, but for many people my age and older, there are these wonderful orange hardback books that were in many public libraries that were written by Ian Thorne. And each one was dedicated to like a different like monster from like kind of the golden age of horror movies and like Universal, Toho Kaiju, that kind of stuff. So I remember very young grabbing those, like the book on Godzilla, Dracula, Frankenstein. As early as I could remember, I loved monsters. I was the kid who was like out in the video store renting Creature from the Black Lagoon, The Wolfman, Dracula at a very young age. And it's just stuck with me my entire life. I've always loved horror. It's the genre I'm most familiar with. It's the one I feel a certain fluency in it, so that when it comes to writing, it's hard to avoid something not being horror.
What attracted you to monsters? Because it feels like you were attracted to monsters, but also universal monsters, sort of classic archetypal monsters, not just any werewolf, but the Wolfman.
Yeah.
Was that all you were allowed to watch? Is black and white?
Yeah, you kind of hit it on the head. Yeah, I was a kid who was not allowed to watch R-rated movies, but I also say I developed a little bit of like elitist pretension very early, where I was like, well, I must encounter the fundamentals of the genre and run with those. And I feel like I had a personal mission through my childhood where I was constantly looking up old Dracula movies and stuff, where I was like, oh, okay, well, I need to find every Hammer horror Dracula movie and watch these now, that kind of thing.
What transitioned you from chasing down old Hammer horror films to wanting to write horror yourself?
Well, I was always into writing to a degree, and I think it was in like my mid-20s where I felt like I'd spent a lot of time doing nothing, but I knew I wanted to do something creatively. I was thinking about going to film school and being a director around 18, and then I quickly had a reality check when I realized that costs a whole fucking ton of money that I didn't have. So instead, I read a lot about film and kind of talked a lot of shit for about like 6 years about like everything I was going to do while doing nothing. I kind of had a moment of realization where it wasn't really the medium I cared so much about. A film, what I really just wanted to be was a storyteller. I wanted to tell stories. So I was like, okay, well, what can I actually do instead of like constantly like agonizing over finding a camera or finding random film equipment or something? There's always a reason I wasn't doing something. So I realized like, I love books. I love writing. I can do that. I can actually work at my craft and do that right now. I don't have to wait on anyone. I don't have to rely on anyone else to do that. So that's kind of what I did. And at that point, I realized, I was woefully underread in the actual horror book genre. I was always a reader, but I'd read the classics, but I hadn't really delved into like 20th century modern horror. I didn't know who all the players were, and I immediately kind of worked toward, amending that. I wanted to figure out who's important, kind of find out like what kind of a horror reader am I? Like, what are my influences? What do I give a shit about? And what are the cool indie horror authors doing that I'm not aware of? Because I knew there must be like this whole world below like the tip of the iceberg of like Stephen King and stuff, which of course I encountered. So from that point on, I started doing my research. And while I was doing that, I also started writing.
Wow. It seems like you were a very conscientious audience, whether it be for childhood monster movies or just horror fiction. You take a very considered approach to it. Were your parents teachers?
Yeah, actually, my parents were both teachers at different points in their career. My father was sociology professor. My mom did some teaching in the community college, but she was mostly kind of a social worker. I don't know. But I kind of always felt like I needed to like fully understand something. It wasn't enough to just jump in. I had a little bit of that like hyper focus that makes you really want to take apart the genre and its conventions from an early age and have like this complete understanding of it. And I think some of what it came from maybe was when I was younger, I'd read a lot of books on that had a little bit of pop analysis in it that talk about what's kind of the subtext of the Wolfman or something, or, Dracula represents this or that. And that kind of got my mind turning in the way that narratives are formed by choices from their creators. And when I started thinking about that, I really started thinking about it. And that's how I started seeing fiction at a really young age. I actually remember the first copy of Dracula I read, it was annotated with a lot of great analysis. And I ate that up because I thought it was fascinating going forward. But I think that was just kind of imprinted on me a little bit.
That makes a lot of sense. That's a pretty nice transition into one of your more recent projects, the Dead Languages podcast, which is a focus on the craft of horror writing. What inspired you to start that?
It kind of started just because PL and I started just having a lot of fun together, really. We co-hosted an event, that's what I call horror 90s anthology Zoom event, like a release party. I only co-hosted it because I had a story in the book, but also my story was written in screenplay format. So it was very awkward to do a reading. So everybody was like, oh, okay, you can co-host or something. You can be a part of it, just co-host. Kale and I ended up having a great time doing it. I co-hosted again to interview Patrick Barb, another author I really like, and I wanted to get in on that and ask some of my own questions. And she said, absolutely, come on in. And then we just kind of kept talking and being like, hey, wouldn't it be fun to do a podcast? People seem to respond well to our back and forth. We're having a good time. People seem to like it. Let's just do it. Doesn't seem to be a lot of horror podcasts that are focused exclusively on indie horror fiction writing from the writer's perspective. And we're yeah, we could just have a blast talking about this because it takes over so much of our lives being young writers. So let's let loose some of this energy on the rest of the public, because I'm sure there's other writers like us who want to chat and bullshit and lament about the world of indie writing.
I think you're up to about episode 4 as of this recording, and it's on Spotify. I recommend it. It is a good time to vicariously kvetch with other writers.
Absolutely.
On a more buttoned-down approach, you are also co-editor of Cosmic Horror Monthly.
Yes.
How'd you land that gig?
At the time, I didn't even know who or what CHM was. I hadn't encountered them yet. But I had just recently, or was about to graduate with my bachelor's degree in marketing. And I was facing down kind of the transition from my grocery store job to trying to figure out my first professional job outside of that. And everyone told me take on free projects. It was online school, so there weren't a lot of internships available to me. So I decided I'd make my own internship. And I just reach out to places that I thought might want some help in marketing. I talked to some of my friends, and one of them recommended CHM. So I reached out to Charles, and I was like, hey, is there something I can do for you? And we ended up kind of settling on me running the Twitter account. He loved what I did with it. We gained subscribers. There was a lot more engagement. We were all very happy with that. And then afterwards, he kind of offered me a position as the social media manager for Cosmic Horror Monthly. And then down the road, he kind of recognized I was doing a little bit more than that. I was taking more part in reading Slush, kind of picking stories, reaching out to authors to highlight in our issues. And he offered me the position of co-editor. I happily took because I have a great time with CHM. And I think it's good as a writer to be on the other end of the whole game as well, to read the slush pile, see it from the other end, and try to be a good literary citizen to your authors, create a good space for them.
Cosmic Horror Monthly obviously covers cosmic horror and weird fiction. What does cosmic horror mean to you?
I think cosmic horror really hinges on a sense of smallness, it's all kind of gets at the feeling that humans are inconsequential, kind of has that mind expanding feeling of feeling small, insignificant, and kind of scared in this cold, vast universe.
So if Philip K. Dick was the voice and vibe of horror in the 20th century, do you think cosmic horror relates to us now in the year 2023? Is that what we're going through? Do you think it is a perspective that informs us in the recent history that we've been living?
I'm not sure, but I think it is one of those things that it's been gaining popularity. I do wonder why? Why are we connecting so much to cosmic horror? And, in a broader way, weird fiction as well. For me, I think of Lovecraft and Arthur Machen as some of the first big cosmic horror writers, big progenitors of the genre, really. And over time, I kind of feel like those tendrils, so to speak, have become more and more mainstream to the point where you can see little Cthulhu plushies and stuff at the mall, which I think is kind of hilarious. Why do we give a shit about cosmic horror now? I have no idea, but there's got to be something buried deep in our psyche that is longing for some kind of I'd say almost hint of the sublime. I think maybe that's it. It's that feeling that you need to. The Grand Canyon's just not enough anymore. You're looking to the stars and wondering what's out there, and I almost kind of think of it as a religious impulse in some ways.
Wow. Because I was going to say that Lovecraftian horror has been a niche for decades. Obviously, the man himself died penniless, and that was the 1920s. And now we're at the point where we do have Cthulhu plushies, and that sort of grows out of the gaming space, Call of Cthulhu, and how the gaming space overlaps with online culture, and everything becomes a chibi eventually. But for it to gain broader acceptance, I think there is a surface area that has made contact with and forgive me, but the zeitgeist, sort of our collective fears of our modern era. It provokes a reaction in us now in a way it maybe didn't 20 years ago. And I wonder if cosmic horror strikes a nerve when we're all feeling inconsequential.
I think that could absolutely be correct, but I will report my secret fear is that cosmic horror has become nothing more than a set of tropes and aesthetics now for an audience, that it's been commodified to a point where a lot of its meaning has been lost to a general audience.
Oh, 100%. You can't just throw tentacles on the cover and have your Cthulhu plushies and say that's cosmic horror. You have to communicate this idea that in the vastness of space, we are nothing. We don't matter.
Yeah, you gotta have that element of that pessimism.
It's very, very dark and grim, or freeing if you want to look at it that way.
Yeah.
But I really do like the texture that you brought into that, which is it is possibly a religious impulse, which is fitting for this cult-like mania of seeking contact with the sublime or outer gods or something that existed before our temporary mortal societies and structures. I really like that idea of transcendence, even though it has that flip side of ego death and destruction.
Yeah, if that's correct, if that has any weight, that, it might be because I feel like we have, with science, a lot of the awe stripped from our world.
We can put a label on something and describe it. And eventually you have people describing these biblically accurate angels, as the joke is going around. But no matter how freaky these multi-winged, multi-eyed, burning wheels in the sky are, if everyone is talking about it and describing it and it becomes a shorthand, you can laugh at it.
And I kind of wonder if part of that is maybe we as humans want to conquer awe. We see something that creates that numinous feeling and we see it and we want to rob it of that. And maybe that is actually what cosmic horror is the response to. It's response to the human urge to conquer awe, to bring awe back into our lives.
Well, Lovecraft's trick was to never describe things. If it was really freaky, he would say it's indescribable.
He would lean on that crutch quite a bit.
He sure did. And it's kind of funny now that as the mythos or this cosmic horror becomes marketed, it does get codified, commodified, broken down into a series of tropes that they can sell you.
Yep, you can slap it on a poster. It looks good.
So what kind of stories do you look for digging through the slush at Cosmic Horror Monthly?
We're expanded beyond cosmic horror. We were receiving a lot of Lovecraftian pastiche, which I think ties into that idea of cosmic horror more as like...
Did you say cosmic borer?
No, I hope not.
Oh, that's what I heard. And I think we need to trademark that right now. We need to copyright that. Cosmic borer.
We don't want to be another Weird Tales. We want to be a version of that that's modern and relevant to what's happening in horror now. We don't want to rehash old Conan, old Lovecraft stories or whatever. So I think it was important for me, and it became very important for Charles too, to kind of open that up a little bit and, say we're not doing strictly cosmic horror, because when people think cosmic horror, they do tend to think like Lovecraft only. And we get a lot of those tentacle stories. We love weird fiction. We still love cosmic horror. We do take a bunch of both. But I think those genres intersect really interesting ways and have a lot to say about us and the human experience.
When you're reading through your slush for weird fiction, how do you decide what is vague bad writing and what is masterful weird fiction?
It's the classic thing. It's like porn, you know it when you see it. I think the biggest thing you can read on the page, if you read a lot of fiction, is that you can sense an author's confidence. And I think that confidence usually to me alludes to intent. And when I can read that confidence on the page, when I can feel like the author is being intentional, it's a lot easier to buy into those weird conceits.
I like that answer. It's still kind of hard to put your finger on.
Absolutely, it is.
So let's talk about your brand new book, Soft Targets.
Soft Targets is about two coworkers who are depressed in dissolution with their data entry office jobs, and they kind of find solace and camaraderie in talking about mass shootings as being both the victims and the perpetrators of them. When one of them finds a little distortion in reality, they find out that some days are not as real as others, and that gives them an opening to act out their violent fantasies without consequences.
I just want to start off by saying that I worked in a warehouse. I mean, I've worked in a few warehouses, but there's this one gig I had where the first time I didn't have any friends there, and it was awful and harrowing and soul-crushing. And the second time, I made friends with the people there, and we turned it into like Animal House. It was just gonzo, because we were unsupervised in a warehouse, and we were having pallet jack races and cardboard box wars and rubber band fights, and just fantastic friendships that I maintain to this day. So I really, really identified with these characters, which was scary.
Yeah.
Did that inspire this book at all? Did you have any sort of mind-numbing, soul-crushing jobs?
Almost all of them. Yeah, no, totally. So I wrote this book when I was working at a grocery store. This was before I finished my degree. I'd been there for about 9 years. So I'd been working here for a long time, and it was not my favorite place to be by any means. And at the time, even placing the book in an office in a weird way was kind of like me being aspirational, because I wanted to work in an office. I wanted to do something different. But of course, I still had to insert my own like workplace malaise into it. But yeah, absolutely. I worked. The only jobs I worked up to this point were like the worst fast food jobs you could imagine and retail. So obviously my view of work was skewed towards the negative quite a bit. But it's absolutely those connections to your coworkers that keep you going. And it's, I remember all the dumb little pranks we'd play and stuff, and the hiding in different places in the store, saying weird stuff over the intercom, or back in my Jack in the Box days, pranking the assistant manager by throwing ice in the fryer, and they're like, "Oh, dude, I don't know what's going on. It just acted up." Putting soy sauce in each other's drinks, and basically hiding eggs around the kitchen, so when somebody would open a drawer, an egg would fall out and break. Like literally everything to like suck some joy out of a miserable experience. So yeah, all of that in Soft Targets is very, very lived in.
It may seem like some kind of Terry Gilliam-esque surreal exaggeration, this warehouse that the people are working in, but I'm telling you from experience, when we literally just had huge rolls of barcodes and we just had to put one on a box and then scan it and enter that number into a spreadsheet just hour after hour, day after day. There were quotas and we were behind schedule. Like, it is all in this book, and you really captured it, which makes it so scary because there is an implicit threat with disaffected males.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we all know this, and we don't need to be some kind of gender studies scholar. You know, it's just known that if you have too many men around with no outlets or engagement or prospect of future, things get dark.
Absolutely. A big portion of the book, I think it is a very male book. It's definitely about toxic masculinity and also kind of the effect of capitalism on everyone. It's hard to divorce it from the male perspective in the book, I think, because, I mean, as you said, let's face it, you know, we're looking at all these mass shooters. They are men.
I wouldn't even necessarily lay the blame at the feet of toxic masculinity, because these are not alpha males who are objectifying women so much as toxified masculinity. It's the other end of the spectrum, which breeds shooters. They feel powerless and they claim this victim status. And that's what makes them so volatile.
And I think that's absolutely right. The book comments on mass shootings, and it is about those to a degree, but I think really the heart of it for me was it's about escapism.
And the way they escape at first is with dark humor.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really dark humor in the book. Unfortunately, it creates a smokescreen for what's going on. If they were openly lashing out at people, they'd get kicked out of this job, you know, right away. But it's like, oh, those guys, you know, it's dark humor. And they could be like, well, it's just a joke. It's just a joke. And that's a very sort of 4chan thing to do. They're sliding the worst opinions and takes out into the public discourse and then retreating behind the fact of, you normies, you can't take a joke. We just have dark senses of humor. But really, Nazis, am I right?
Yes.
LOL.
That's absolutely it. I'm not even sure they even really give a shit or have fully formed opinions on this stuff. I almost see it as more like they're desperately chasing like a little bit of dopamine or some kind of brain hormone that's going to give them some feel goods just from chasing a little bit of outrage or shock or something. Like they're so trodden down and bored and disaffected, and they're now like scraping the bottom of the barrel to get something to make them feel something at their job.
If you show me a neglected child or someone who doesn't feel seen, I will show you someone who tries to seek attention.
Yeah, they're acting out.
And when they can't get attention in a healthy way, bad attention is still attention.
That's absolutely it. Yep.
These two young men, they form this kinship. They bond over this hatred of work life and their sick obsession with hoping that a mass shooter will bust into the office so that they can go home early, even if in a body bag. From the beginning of the book, it starts building up this head of steam, and you're like, okay, these two are becoming neurotically enmeshed.
Yeah, they're like codependent.
And this is picking up steam. And just when you think that the darker of the pair is going to come out of his room with a gun and be like, hey, I've got body armor and AK-47s, let's go shoot up the office, he comes out with a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And it's so much scarier because we're like, okay, I know where this is going, but you don't. Because he comes out with a spreadsheet and he's like, I figured it out, dude. Reality is not consistent. There are loopholes in the time stream that we can exploit. And you're like, oh no, we have stepped off this terrible ride into something much freakier.
You almost just wish you'd do something more normal, like buy a gun.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, we can deal with that as Americans.
Exactly.
We understand that. We don't understand the reality in spreadsheets.
It's that weird fiction
Yeah.
cosmic horror, and I thought that was very well executed.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that was a fun scene to write, but also very challenging. Because it's written in first person, you have to be able to sell that idea, how this conversation would go down, and somehow build a gradual progression through all these observations that you can buy, the narrator sort of kind of buying into and setting them up to go where the story goes. When I wrote it, I kind of just went with, these guys aren't scientists. They're just dudes who live in an apartment. I'm going to write it in normal dude language. I will let the narrator ask any question I would ask. And if somebody doesn't know, they'll just say, I don't know, because we don't know. And we'll just move on from there. But it was a lot of fun. But yeah, it was a tough scene to write.
When you decided to tackle this weighty topic of mass shootings, did you do a bunch of research? Did you immerse yourself in the psychology of mass shooters and things like that?
Well, I kind of felt like I'd been immersed with it like most of my entire life. As I was in grade school when Columbine happened, and I feel like every week since there's been some kind of mass violence on display. For me, this wasn't so much about like the psychology of real mass shooters, but it is also about mass shooters in some way. So I didn't really feel like I was wanting to necessarily take real life elements of how mass shooters operate or think, because I don't think they actually share a lot of resemblance to my characters. This is more, I think, about people, the broader American culture being affected by mass shooters than mass shooters specifically.
It's more of an expression of American melees.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I would say this is not like a we need to talk about Kevin book or anything. Yeah, this is definitely more of a reflection of American culture.
Ultimately, I would say this book is a plea for empathy.
Yeah.
The only way through this dehumanization that leads these young men to dehumanize others and to see destruction or self-destruction at any cost is empathy. There's this great turn in the book where this dark pair of males are separated. Their bond is broken. The sad, lonely loser is there at work, and he's looking at all these people that he wants to blow away because they don't care about him and he doesn't care about them. And they start approaching him and reaching out and offering support and noticing that he's going through a rough patch. And it's like, oh no, these people, these mindless drones that he hates, are all suddenly becoming humanized. And they're reaching out to try to help him. It shows how toxified he is and that he recoils and he rebuffs their attempts. There's so many little nuances in this story that are really smart and that really land. I had a bunch of stuff to do, and I was like, okay, I'm going to read part of this book, and then I'm going to go write, and then I'm going to do this other stuff. I could not put this book down. I mean, I plowed through it. It really gets your hooks in you because, A, it keeps you guessing. Because you're like, oh, this is a story about mass shooters. And it's like, is it? Because there's all sorts of crazy shit happening. But also, it lands in all these little character ways, little subtle surprises that just keep bubbling up and popping in your face. It's really, really good. Was this some dark take on the multiverse craze? Was it your version of a Groundhog's Day story? Why this title reality?
When I started writing the book, I actually had no idea where it was going. I wrote the first scene, and it's pretty much the exact same first scene that's in the book, the first chapter, where they're both talking in their car about their mass shooting fantasies. I didn't really know where it was going, but I kind of sat with it. And I was like, this feels right. This feels like a good scene. I want to follow this. I'm not a plotter at all. I'm a pantser. And so I was kind of discovering the story for myself. But I think what brought me to the title reality was, number one, I've had other stories in the past that kind of deal with the malleable nature of reality. And I think it's an idea that one of those pet ideas that concerns me. It interests me. I think it preoccupies my mind sometimes. Like, if I made this choice, 10 years ago, would I live in the same apartment? Would I Would I be the same person? What would my life look like? That kind of thing. And also, as I was writing it and I was kind of discovering the story, what I was looking for was an element. I knew I needed a central weird conceit because that's kind of what I wanted the story to be. But I needed to have something that would give the characters a way to explore this concept more fully. And really, it was just finding that right plot element that would allow my characters to do something interesting. And that's how the title Reality came about.
I think I can draw a through line between your preoccupation with consequences and different timelines or different realities back to you as a young reader reading these annotated Draculas and things like that, when you're like, okay, there's these contexts and there's all these choices, and they all inform which way the story's going to go.
I'm an overanalyzer at heart. Yeah, I think a lot about everything.
Well, it shows in your writing in a good way. None of it comes across as dry or plotty because you are propelling it with characters and dialogue in a really naturalistic way. And I think that's part of why the book is so hard to put down.
It's funny you mentioned that conversational aspect. That was done in defiance of some of the stock voice of weird fiction. I was reading tons of weird fiction. I am a huge Ligotti fan and everyone who's come after him. But the main character is oftentimes a alienated academic elitist who speaks like an alienated academic that has a lot of distance from the audience. And I was thinking, wouldn't it be cool we could write Ligotti stories that were like in the voice of the dude you worked with who pounds Monster Energy drinks at work and shit? It also, to me, alludes to the inherent, maybe, classism in the genre where it feels like the works themselves are disconnected from regular people. And I was working at a grocery store. Mm-hmm. To me, regular people were people with working class jobs who haven't gone to college. I hadn't at the time. It was rebuild the weird fiction genre a little bit in an image that reflected my life more.
That is going to take us to the Halloween portion of the show. I don't have a great transition for it. Do you have any wild trick-or-treating stories?
Really, for me, the whole point of trick-or-treating was the costume and being able to show it off. Because I was always very proud of my original ideas. I believe one year I was book accurate Dracula, so I had a big old white mustache that was literally like couch fluff or something glued onto my face.
You had an aquiline nose.
Yes! Oh my god. I remember opening that book up and just trying to figure out what all of this means and trying to translate it into a Halloween costume. God, what does it mean that the hair curls in its own profusion? And how do I capture that?
I could see you going to some latter-day Van Helsing ancestor's door to trick-or-treat, and they just flip out and go after you with a stake. Have you had any animal encounters in the Pacific Northwest?
Okay, so this is my scariest run-in with an animal footprint. It was my birthday many moons ago, and my wife and I decided to rent a cabin in the woods. We also decided to buy a lot of weed, and we went out walking by a river, just burning through joints, barely have our eyes open, and we came across a bear print, and we did not know what to do. And we were we're suddenly trying to search our memory, is this fresh? Is there a bear here? We're not biologists, so we don't know shit. We're just stoned people looking at a bear print in the sand, being oh fuck, what do we do? And then suddenly we're walking back to the car, probably the most paranoid I've ever been, doing 360 looks around, hoping not to see this black bear that's definitely within 100 feet of us or something. But yeah, that was probably the closest thing I've had to a real scary animal encounter.
But Carson, when you looked down and saw only one set of bear tracks, that's when the bear centaur was carrying you. All right, where can our listeners find more?
Well, I have a website. You can find me at carsonwinter.com. It has all the stuff that has been published that I've written. Soft Targets, it's coming out on March 22nd, 3 days from the recording. By the time you hear this, it might already be out, but you can buy that on tenebrispress.com. You can find me on Twitter at Carson Winter 3, Instagram at Winter Carson, and I'm also hanging around Spoutable. I don't know if anyone else is on that platform, but I'm there. I'm waiting for Spoutable to be the next big thing, and I'm at Carson Winter there.
And you can be found at the Dead Languages podcast on Spotify.
Yep, and also Cosmic Horror Monthly. Please subscribe. If you want a good introduction to the cosmic horror and weird fiction genre, check out CHM.
Well, Carson, thank you so much for coming on, and thank you for sending me a copy of Soft Targets, because it really was a barn burner.
Oh, thank you so much, and thank you for having me on. This has been like an absolute pleasure.
Subscribe and follow the show. Links are in the show notes. You can find Ryan at 20th Century RG with the number 20 on YouTube, and you can find me at jeffccarter.com and hit the link to pick up my collection, We Bleed Orange and Black, 31 fun-sized tales for Halloween. Until next time, stay spooktacular.